The Beaver Lake Cree Nation is a First Nations band government located 105 kilometres northeast of Edmonton, Alberta, representing people of the Cree ethno-linguistic group in the area around Lac La Biche, Alberta, which is the location of the band office. The treaty area is Treaty 6. The Intergovernmental Affairs Office consults with persons on the government treaty contacts list. There are 2 parcels of land reserved for the band by the Canadian Crown: Beaver Lake Indian Reserve No. 131 and Blue Quills First Nation Indian Reserve. The latter reserve is shared with 5 other bands. A Métis settlement profile prepared by the Government of Alberta notes that the tribal affiliation is Woodland Cree, a Wood Cree, and their linguistic group is Algonquin. The population, which includes 390 on reserve and 664 off reserve, is 1,054 according to the Alberta government. The land base by reserve Beaver Lake is 131, 6,145.3, total 6,145.3. Chief Henry Gladue is Chief of Beaver Lake First Nation. Dennis Paradis, Herman Cardinal, Jermaine Anderson are councillors. Other elected representatives include Member of the Legislative Assembly Shane Saskew. Brian John was the Conservative MP for Fort McMurray, Athabasca, from 2004 until his resignation in 2014. The seat is now vacant. The governments of Alberta and Canada authorize hundreds of projects or developments representing thousands of individual authorizations related to oil and gas, forestry, mining and other activities on Beaver Lake Cree Nation core lands, covering a large portion of northeast Alberta and falling outside the boundaries of any Aboriginal reserve, including within its territory. The Cold Lake Weapons Range. The Beaver Lake Cree Nation are contesting the cumulative effect of these projects and developments on core traditional territory. On the 14th of May 2008, the Beaver Lake Cree Nation issued a statement of claim against the governments of Alberta and Canada, claiming that, in failing to manage the overall cumulative environmental effects of development on core traditional territory, Alberta and Canada have breached the solemn commitment in the 9th of September 1876 Treaty 6 that the BLCN could hunt, fish and trap in perpetuity. On the 30th of April 2013, in Layman v. Alberta, the Court of Appeal of Alberta dismissed Alberta and Canada's appeal of Honourable Madam Justice B. A. Brown's historic, precedent-setting judgment, in their entirety, issued in March 2012. History. The Cree expanded steadily westward from the Hudson-James Bay country. Although the date of arrival of the Cree in the Lac La Biche region is unknown, archaeological evidence in the form of pre-contact pottery indicates that the Cree were in this region in the 1500s. A type of early Cree pottery known as Clearwater Lake Punctate is found regularly in forests in neighboring Saskatchewan. The Clearwater Lake Punctate, believed to be ancestral to the Cree people, is a ceramic container made during the late prehistoric period, dated to between 250 and 1,100 years before present. There is one example in the Canadian Museum of Civilization in Gatineau, Quebec, that was found on Whitefish Island on Amisk Lake, Saskatchewan in 1950s by Gina Suwap of the local Cree First Nation. Its distinctive features include an encircling ring of exterior punctates which raise interior bosses located just below an everted lip. The body of the pot is textured with coarser textile impressions. Pots of this variety are found over a wide area including parts of eastern Saskatchewan, Manitoba and northwestern Ontario. Amisk Lake was on the historic Voyager Highway that led to the rich Athabasca region. Examples were also found on Black Fox Island, on Lac La Biche, and on the shores of Wapasule. The BLCN included the history on their official webpage and in a legal document regarding the proposed Enbridge Northern Gateway project. Location on fur trade route. The traditional land of the Beaver Lake Cree Nation was on the historical Voyager route that linked the rich Athabascan region to Hudson Bay. David Thompson and George Simpson used the fur trade route via the Beaver River from the main Methi portage route that reached the Athabasca River. David Thompson founded a trading post on Red Deer's Lake, now known as Lac La Biche, in 1798–99 and overwintered there, entering copious notes in his diary on the Nathathaway, their customs, traditions and the western boreal forest, including this passage: "Plenteous supply of whitefish and beaver on the region of the western forest land, at a fine lake called the Red Deer's Lake, at the head of the small streams which feed the Beaver River, the southern branch of the Churchill River. In October we erected a trading house and passed the winter. There was competition between the Canadian traders of the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company. The Cree, one of the largest tribes in Canada, were referred to by the early explorers and fur traders as Christano, Kinistano, Kilistan, Cree, Chris and various other names such as Nathathaway. Cree territory extended west from the Hudson-James Bay region to the foot of the Rocky Mountains, and in Alberta, between the north banks of the North Saskatchewan River to Fort Chipewyan. This includes the Beaver, Athabasca and Peace River basins. It is noted in the Department of Indian Affairs annual reports that PICIS of the Lac La Biche band as far north as Great Slave Lake. Alexander Mackenzie, who traveled from Montreal to the Arctic Ocean via the Methi portage, provided a detailed account of the Kinistano in 1789. An oblate mission was established at Lac La Biche in 1853, and missionaries visited the Cree on the south shore of Beaver Lake as early as 1856. The Blue Quills Indian Residential School in Lac La Biche, which opened in 1862, was one of the first residential schools in Alberta. Treaty 6. Chief P.Yassi Wawi-Chakud, also known as PICIS or PICIS, and Councillor PCC_Mu signed the adhesion made to Treaty 6 at Fort Pitt on 9 September 1876, on behalf of the Beaver Lake Band No. 131. Traditional land use. A report commissioned by Cenevis acknowledged that the Beaver Lake Cree Nation indicated that they practice traditional land use activities and that they possess traditional ecological knowledge. This report contains detailed maps describing sites where Aboriginal groups practice traditional trapping, hunting, fishing, berry picking and plant harvesting activities throughout the region. The traditional lands from which these resources are drawn may also contain sites of historical, cultural and spiritual importance. Whitefish Atikamek was the staff of life of the Wood Cree, and they lived in areas of high whitefish availability, such as Lac La Biche, oil sands development and Beaver Lake Cree Nation. David Suzuki explained that BLCN lands cover an area the size of Switzerland and overlap the oil sands. The territory now yields 560,000 barrels of oil a day. Industry wants to raise that to 1.6 million. BLCN land already has 35,000 oil and gas sites, 21,700 kilometers of seismic lines, 4,028 kilometers of pipelines and 948 kilometers of road. Traditional territory has been carved into a patchwork quilt with wild land reduced to small pieces between roads, pipes and wires, threatening animals like woodland caribou that can't adapt to these intrusions. Upon retirement as an MP, Alberta opposition leader Brian Jean had suggested he would enter provincial or local politics in Fort McMurray, Athabasca, because of his concerns for the speed of oil sands development at the expense of inadequate infrastructure development, such as hospitals, senior homes and twinning of Highway 63, the perilous route connecting Fort McMurray with southern Alberta. Jean explains that the most urgent issues facing communities he represented were in provincial, not federal hands. Jean was elected MLA in the riding of Fort McMurray-Conklin in the 2015 Alberta general election. Cumulative Effects of Development, a pivotal 1983 article entitled An Ecological Framework for Environmental Impact Assessment in Canada, provided the impetus for the increased use of cumulative effects assessments instead of conventional single-project environmental impact assessments that had been used since the 1970s. As expectations broadened in terms of the scope of assessments, it became apparent that conventional single-project EIAs did not consider environmental degradation resulting from cumulative effects. The governments of Alberta and Canada authorized 300 projects or developments representing 19,000 individual authorizations related to oil and gas, forestry, mining and other activities on Beaver Lake Cree Nation core lands, covering a large portion of northeast Alberta and falling outside the boundaries of any Aboriginal reserve including within its territory. The Cold Lake Weapons Range, the Beaver Lake Cree Nation are contesting the cumulative effect of these projects and developments on core traditional territory. On the 14th of May 2008, the Beaver Lake Cree Nation issued a statement of claim against the governments of Alberta and Canada, claiming that, in failing to manage the overall cumulative environmental effects of development on core traditional territory, Alberta and Canada have breached the solemn commitment in the 9th of September 1876 Treaty 6 that the BLCN could hunt, fish and trap in perpetuity. On the 30th of April 2013, in Lehman v. Alberta, the Court of Appeal of Alberta dismissed Alberta and Canada's appeal of Honourable Madam Justice B. A. Brown's historic, precedent-setting judgment, in their entirety, issued in March 2012. Kataskeno Declaration. On the 14th of May 2008, the Beaver Lake Cree released the Kataskeno Declaration. Kawiki skitakwinomakia no OHCI miskasaka hikani kekana wapami koyako hiaskia katapasana hikateki ota askilasana hikaninka haniskak. Ekapepamachi haokek, asserting the role as caretakers of the traditional territories and started a legal action to a. enforce recognition of the constitutionally protected rights to hunt, trap and fish, and b. protect the ecological integrity of the territories. They alleged that development from the oil sands, forestry and the local municipal government infringes upon the First Nations' 1876 treaty rights to hunt, trap and fish among other resources. They foregrounded a native map as evidence. The lawsuit. Through Treaty 6, the BLCN were given reserve land and the right to hunt and fish in perpetuity on a much larger piece of territory, the traditional hunting grounds. The essence of the lawsuit is that approximately 17,000 approved oil sands projects will make hunting and fishing impossible for the 920-member band and the future generations. The Co-Operative Group. The Co-Operative Group supported the Beaver Lake Cree Nation as part of its toxic fuels campaign against the alarming global trend of developing carbon-intensive unconventional fossil fuels such as tar sands, which ran from 2008 to 2012. The Co-Operative Group became aware of the Beaver Lake Cree Nation concerns regarding oil sands development via the 2008 Kataskeno Declaration. Colin Baines, campaigns manager at the Co-Operative Group, described the Beaver Lake Cree Nation legal action as perhaps the best chance we have to stop tar sands expansion. Their involvement and campaigning boosted the national and international profile of the legal challenge. The Co-Operative Group sponsored a trip by then Chief Al Layman and other senior members of Beaver Lake Cree Nation and the legal council to London to officially launch the Toxic Fuels campaign in February 2009. A rally was held outside of the Canadian Embassy in protest of tar sand expansion. This resulted in widespread media attention, with major features in The Guardian, Financial Times in July 2009. A team from the BBC accompanied representatives of the Co-Operative Group to Beaver Lake to document the visit. The resulting program, entitled Tar Wars, was shown in the UK and globally as part of the Our World series. The visit to Beaver Lake generated significant media coverage in Alberta. In September 2010, then Chief Layman returned to the UK as guest of honour for the launch of a major photographic exhibition on the oil sands called Tarnished Earth, in which the BLCN legal challenge featured. The Co-Operative Group fundraised and donated over $400,000 to support the BLCN legal case. It also funded research into the impacts of oil sands development on the endangered woodland caribou and supported a successful First Nation legal action to force federal government to take action under the Species at Risk Act. It also supported international solidarity campaigning, for example sponsoring a youth exchange with UK student campaigning organisation People and AMP Planet in July 2011. UK-based companies like BP and Shell and UK investors are very active in the Athabasca oil sands. The Cooperative Asset Management, then part of the Co-Operative Group, cited the Beaver Lake Cree Nation and litigation brought by local communities increasingly affected by pollution, deforestation and wildlife disturbance, claiming breaches of the treaty rights protecting the traditional livelihoods. In shareholder resolutions tabled at the 2010 AGMs of BP and Shell, the Co-Operative Group in the United Kingdom is the world's largest consumer cooperative. The Co-Operative Group worked with Drew Milden of Woodward & Company law firm out of Victoria as legal counsel for the BLCN. Cold Lake Oil Sands. The Cold Lake Oil Sands deposit, located near Cold Lake, Alberta, south of the Athabasca Oil Sands, and directly east of the capital Edmonton, is one of the largest oil sands deposits in Alberta. Alberta owns 81% of mineral rights, including oil sands. Mineral rights owned by the Crown are managed by the Alberta Department of Energy on behalf of the citizens of the province. The remaining 19% of the mineral rights in the province are held by the federal government within Aboriginal reserves, by successors entitled to the Hudson's Bay Company, by the railway companies and by the descendants of original homesteaders through rights granted by the federal government before 1887. These rights are referred to as freehold rights. The federal and provincial government granted roughly 300 projects with about 19,000 permits in an area covering a large portion of northeast Alberta, both inside and outside the Beaver Lake First Nation Reserve, including the Cold Lake Weapons Range. Most of the grants were made by the province of Alberta, but the federal government made 7 of these grants. The lawyer for the BLCN, Mr. Milden, explains that BLCN are seeking compensation for losing hunting and fishing rights for the cumulative effects of oil sands and other industries, such as mining and forestry, violated their treaty rights in past and current projects. The Beaver Lake Cree are part of a legal dispute over this development on the treaty lands. In 2008 they issued a declaration asserting they are the legitimate caretakers of these lands. This was followed by a 2012 lawsuit against the governments of Alberta and Canada, alleging that by allowing unfettered development without the band's permission, the governments had violated their treaty rights. The band has received support in the case from UK-based COOP, the Co-Operative, and the ENGO People and AMP Planet. In 1980, a plant in Cold Lake oil sands was one of just 2 oil sands plants under construction in Alberta. Some of the oil sands in the Cold Lake deposit have a low enough density that they can be extracted through drilling, as opposed to mining. Primrose Thermal In Situ Oil Sands Project. Canadian Natural Resources Limited is one of the largest independent crude oil and natural gas producers in the world, with its head office in Calgary, with operations focused in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, the North Sea and offshore West Africa. CNRL's Primrose Field produced 299,000 barrels per day. Synthetic crude oil in 2012, c. 100,000 to 107,000 barrels per day in 2013, and expects to add value for decades. Canadian Natural Resources Limited is an oil and gas exploration, development and production company centered in Calgary, Alberta. Operations are focused in Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, the North Sea and offshore West Africa. It ranks number 251 on the Forbes Global 2000 list for 2009. Canadian Natural uses the Kirby South steam-assisted gravity drainage extraction method, including both a cyclical. The Primrose project uses CSS, a cyclic steam stimulation, also called huff and puff, where steam is injected under pressure into the formation to melt the heavy, sticky oil, then shut off while the warmed oil is pumped out. Then the process is repeated. And steam-assisted gravity drainage technologies. The Primrose and Wolf Lake Thermal In Situ, located approximately 55 kilometres north of Bonnyville. The Canadian Natural Resources Limited's operations use an in situ, or underground extraction technology called cyclic steam stimulation, which involves injecting thousands of gallons of superhot, high-pressure steam into deep underground reservoirs. This heats and liquefies the hard bitumen and creates cracks through which the bitumen flows and is then pumped to the surface. This is not a spill but a pipeline blowout due to the cyclic steam stimulation extraction method. By June 29, the Canadian Natural Resources claimed the oil and water leak at Primrose affected 4 hectares of slough. On the 24th of June 2013, CNRL noticed a mixture of heavy oil and water was discovered on Monday near Pad 22 on its Primrose Thermal In Situ Oil Sands project, located on the Cold Lake Air Weapons Range. On the 27th of June 2013, the Alberta Energy Regulator's press release described it as a release of bitumen emulsion to surface at a high-pressure cyclic steam project in an off-lease area that has impacted a nearby slough. The Air and the Alberta Environment and Sustainable Resource Development, Alberta Environment and Alberta Water and Sustainable Resource Development merged into Alberta Environment and Sustainable Resource Development, with a mandate to protect and enhance Alberta's natural environment. Are monitoring the release and investigating the cause. Cleanup began in May 2013. In July 2013, the Alberta Energy Regulator told the Canadian Natural Resources Limited to stop injecting steam into the ground near Cold Lake after a series of 4 spills. They have been unable to stop an underground oil blowout that has killed numerous animals and contaminated a lake, forest, and mesquite. Its operations in Cold Lake alter. The documents indicate that, since cleanup started in May. Some 26,000 barrels of bitumen mixed with surface water have been removed, including more than 4,500 barrels of bitumen. The 2013 incident appeared to be similar to one that occurred at Primrose on 3 January 2009. Citations